We're hosting Rae Ann Bruno, a thought leader, consultant, trainer, thought leader in ITIL best practices, process reengineering, national speaker. If you've spent any time in HDI or ITSM, you've probably run into Rae Ann Bruno at multiple different locations and venues, speaking on multiple different topics. Welcome to Ticket Volume, news and information for improving IT experiences, powered by InvGate. Rae Ann, welcome. Thank you for joining Ticket Volume.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me.
So I didn't mention it, but she is also a host for XLA TV. What is that exactly? What is XLA TV?
So XLA TV is really trying to get people moving forward with XLAs and just understanding them. There's training involved as well, but we are hosting different people, interviewing them, different companies, just to see where they are with XLAs. So if anybody has a story, let us know, and trying to educate the industry as well.
Excellent. Yeah, this is very cutting edge. This is where you see service desks and service management organizations starting to lead and venture into this category of what I call experience management or experience design. What do you call it? Why is experience such a hot topic right now?
A lot of times we hear that people have experience initiatives. However, it's using the terminology more than actually establishing an experience journey within the organization. But I believe it's hot for a few reasons. One, we're hearing a lot, especially with ITIL 4, about watermelon metrics, where, we hit all the numbers, but everybody's complaining or they're escalating or they're bypassing process. So something is wrong, right? Something is amiss. And then the other, I feel that right now, just after having gone through, are we through the pandemic? I think after having gone through the pandemic, it's raised an awareness within organizations about how important the employee experience is. And it's an incredibly hot job market right now. You can work almost anywhere because now we've got these hybrid environments or fully remote opportunities. And I think companies are focusing more on, keeping their employees. So I think those are some of the reasons it's hot. But I will tell you that we were talking about it prior to the pandemic. Absolutely. Just because I think people realize it goes beyond transactions.
Yes, exactly. People are getting what they need, not necessarily always within the constraints that they'd like or the ways that they like, but they're getting what they need and maybe sometimes still complaining, even though, like what you said, the watermelon metrics, they're getting the things that they're requesting, their incidents are being closed, but in reality, they're still not happy.
Right. And there's a concept that we talk about called moments over time. And it's the fact that, especially as IT, we tend to take this transactional approach. How was this incident? How was this request? Did we hit our targets? And if you look across IT, did we hit our availability targets? Did we do this? And we're just very siloed and we're not looking end to end at the overall experience, and that the way people feel is not about one transaction, right? It's based on multiple transactions, and they just start to have a feeling about it, or they're disgruntled, or they'll go around those processes or go complain to somebody.
Yeah, exactly. I see this, it's common actually when you get that survey, how was your service today, rate it 1 to 10. And so often we blame the agent for that experience. We ding them if they get a 7 or an 8. If you're using NPS metrics, that's a non-rated number, but really it's a holistic experience.
Yep.
When I called in, who chose the IVR system, who chose the ACD system, who actually implemented the service and built the service before we even got to the point where you're calling about it being down.
Oh, really good point. So I had somebody in an experience class once who made the comment. He said, if people are calling the service desk, we've already failed, right? Because they can't do something in their jobs. So something has failed. And yet we tend to place, just as you're saying, all this emphasis on that support experience. But how about backing up and figuring out why they had to call to begin with, just like you're leading toward?
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. I spoke with someone recently about SLAs, and they pointed out SLAs shouldn't really be paused. But so many times we see people pausing them for okay, I'm waiting for the vendor, or okay, I'm waiting for the customer. And that really was we abused SLAs
Yes,
to
we
the
do.
point to the point where we had to come up with a new one, these XLAs. So how do people get started?
There are a few ways. First of all, I think we need to listen to what we're hearing, right? And then we need to start recording it. So when people are making these comments, they're giving us some kind of a hint. And typically customer satisfaction surveys are very oriented toward the actual transaction. In fact, I had a very frustrating experience with a large, well-known organization who's very mature in their processes, has very well-trained people. And it took 6 different times to get what I finally needed. And it's not through any one of those people's faults, right? It's so many different moving parts. But the only way that that company would know that I had a bad experience is if somebody shared what I said, right? Because transactionally, I will tell you, I gave them high scores on their customer sat surveys because I answered the questions that were asked, and those answers were favorable. But my experience was not. So I think that's the first thing. If we're hearing these comments, let's capture them. And I'm sure you know of Nate Brown, and I know many years ago, his call center was saying, we're hearing these comments, we're hearing these comments. So they made it as simple as using a CX Easy button, which is in essence plugged into your USB cord. You hit the button and it takes you into your CRM tool to capture a comment. And then they did some analytics on those comments and they found some consistency in what people were saying. And then they got all the right people in the company involved. And I do want to make that point too. You mentioned that a lot of support centers and organizations are starting to focus on experience. However, what I've seen a lot of times is HR is focusing on experience by having an employee sat survey and taking actions and only involving IT if it's about technology. And IT has a user experience initiative that's more about how do you like our services? And they shouldn't be independent, So when we're hearing these comments, it's about how I feel about my company. It's about whether or not I can do my job. It's about how I'm impacting our external customers. And it's about how I enjoyed or did not enjoy this experience. So I would say that the first step is start to listen, start to document, start to learn from that.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love it. So often I've suggested to people, yes, you can capture the 1 to 10, but after you capture it, you probably want to leave like a spot for the story, because that really is where you start to hear what people are saying, what they really are thinking beyond just, are you satisfied? Yes or no?
It's good advice. Very good advice.
So what are some of the most obvious places to look for experience improvement? Where do you see people focusing their XLA initiatives to begin with?
So I think some people struggle with how to get started. And I think when you start to have an idea, first of all, I want to make one very clear point. XLAs do not replace SLAs. Mm-hmm. XLAs work hand in hand. They augment SLAs. So a lot of times when you're starting to look at how people are feeling and what we're learning, then we start to look at the data to see, okay, what are we seeing on the other side of that? How can we quantify this? What do we know about it? And a lot of times when you start building your XLAs, and we're not going to get it right the first time, all the time, but when we start asking these questions, one day I'll happily show you an XLA stack, but it's pretty much this overarching question about sentiment. So one that we use in the class is, are you happy with your phone? And then there are these sub-questions about what's most important to people about their phone. And it might be, is your battery lasting a long time? Can you get your email on your phone? Whatever you learn is most important to people and impacting their overall sentiment is going to be in your XLA. And then you still have your operational metrics, but one big piece to that is it now elevates, like you can have all these silos and you can have all these efficiency metrics within. However, now let's elevate it to a higher level, and let's all know how we're actually impacting that end-to-end experience. And that's where the XLAs come in and give you visibility to that. And a lot of times it changes how many SLAs you have or what's on your SLAs.
It's the new evolution of hearing the service experience. We can still keep our blessed SLAs and track service levels. Am I hitting them? Are we still responding within specific time frames? Uptime, availability, degradation of service. But we're going to supplement them. We're going to start listening to, number one, what the customers actually care about, what they value. And then you can start measuring that because that's what's important to them.
Yes, you got it. And if we go back to something you said a little earlier, where someone said we shouldn't pause our SLA clocks, I think that would come out, right? We would start to hear that they tell me it's going to be fixed by this time, but then, this isn't happening and I can't do my job. And we'll start to hear more of the why behind it. And it might be interesting. It might not all be transactional based. It might be how I feel about IT in general. It might be how I feel about my company in general. We'll learn a lot through it.
Yeah, I'm doing this presentation on surveys right now, and we talk about, are you satisfied with service, or how satisfied are you in your job? And what I realized was that the context of that question matters so much. What if someone actually just hates what they're doing? What if they hate their job?
Yeah.
What if they just had a family member pass and they're just down as far as they can get? You're not going to get a very good answer in situations like that. So understanding that context gives you a bit more understanding of the lived experience.
Yeah, and I think that NPS is an element of it. It's just, first of all, there's no silver bullet, right? There's no end-all be-all survey. And so the NPS might give me an indication that, and maybe we just got somebody on an off day, but if I'm seeing a pattern, if I'm seeing a trend that people aren't happy with something, then I've got to get under it. And that's where I go look at my metrics and start to get specific on the questions. But NPS is a good place, to get started, or at least get a clue, right, about what's going on and how people are feeling.
So where's the right team and authority in an organization to get started on something like this? Does it live like in a manager? Is it the service management office? Who should own this kind of thing?
What an incredible question. If this really is a company-wide initiative, it should not sit in IT. And we actually talk about an experience management office. It's because it's not just IT. It's everything about their company. In fact, I read an article recently that talked about Gen Z, our newest generation to the workforce. And I think we have to remember that what they expect is based on how they grew up. So they grew up with a lot of collaboration. They grew up being able to work at any time of the day, right? And they grew up with having the tools at their fingertips they need to have. So it actually said that they have this expectation of a very strong digital experience, right? They want to stay productive. And if they can't, then they will go elsewhere. And they also want to keep growing and getting opportunities. So it's kind of interesting when you look at that. So to that point, we're pretty limiting if we're just looking at the user experience or if we're just looking at employee SAT scores. So I think that there needs to be representation across the organization, and IT should be a partner. Because yes, IT can enable a lot, right? If we're finding out, it's really hard even to have a meeting in a conference room, nothing works. That's the perception, right? Okay, well, can IT come in and help us with some of that? But it needs to be elevated in the organization. It needs to have that leadership understanding and go beyond terminology. Experience isn't just another buzzword. Experience is what people feel and what is actually happening in their jobs and whether or not they can do those jobs. So to understand that, you're really going to come at it from a lot of different angles. I mean, I mentioned, I might have kind of simplified that, saying start with comments. I mean, you do use surveys. There's a whole science around it. And what you're learning from it, we always say there's an art and a science to it. So you do need to apply that, have this overall journey, understand, personas. There's just so many different moving parts. But ideally, it would be great that it lives as the XMO, the Experience Management Office. But I have seen a lot of IT departments try to start this from a grassroots effort or an IT effort, and they're making it an extension of their service management office. And I think that's to be seen whether or not that is successful. At least maybe it starts the momentum.
Yeah, I like that. I had a friend once say, what's a synonym for experience? I couldn't come up with one. As hard as I tried, looked it up everywhere, could not find it. There really is nothing to replace the word experience.
Oh, I love it. I think I'm going to use that in the future.
It really is. It doesn't describe anything else. It is the experience. You cannot necessarily quantify it. I'll sometimes ask, how was your drive? Okay, good or bad? If it was good, prove it. What are the metrics that say that it was a good drive. And really it is. It's all about the emotion. It's all about the feeling of how that is and their interpretation of it. Sure, it could be the radio. It could be, I drive a Beamer and I love it and it makes me feel powerful or whatever. But it's that combination of those things that's really hard to describe and capture with objective data.
Exactly. And also things are situational, right? Like you said, I'm part of that situational, the car that I'm driving, whether or not I can listen to an audio book. And different people, some people would like to drive on country roads and other people would like to be on quick highways. So that's always an interesting dynamic to it as well.
Yeah. And gosh, this really is a good metaphor because there's like other drivers on the road too, and they can have an influence on you. Oh my gosh, it's such a good metaphor.
Look at you, Matt. You're going to have to build it into your presentation.
So I love the idea of the XMO, right? And of course that's going to be a luxury, just like the service management office was, back in the days of just trying to get our hands around the rapid change of technology. This is going to be the rapid change of experience. If you can afford that luxury, great. You're going to stack that office with experienced designers who are going to be able to do that user research and interview people and, perform studies, usability studies, customer effort studies, that sort of thing. I really like that. And I also like what you pointed out. The conference room example is a great one where it's not just IT. You're going to need facilities there because they're going to control a lot of that environment. They'll probably need someone from HVAC. How do we control the temperature in the room? All of the details of that experience means that your company needs to come together to deliver.
Exactly. So through interviews and conversations, we start to understand what matters to people. And then that's where the science comes in. How do we know we're listening to the right information? Is this representative of enough people in our organization? And then we just start marrying that to, making our XLA stack, but also marrying it to service levels. And we never really said, hopefully everybody's figured out that XLAs are experience level agreements.
Yeah. I'll put it in the title of the episode. They won't miss it.
Okay. That's perfect. That's perfect.
So I've gotten started. I've got my SMO. We're starting to do user research. We're starting to hear what customers are saying. What do I do next? What do you think is the second step after we start listening to people?
I don't know if it's necessarily the second, but you're going to get guided by what you're learning. So what are we learning and where do we need to focus and who else do we need to talk to? And what level of control do we have to make any changes to this? But just dig deeper. There are many different ways to do that. But once we've got our experience level agreement, let's start asking those questions and start learning and comparing it to the SLAs. I feel like that's a big piece. Someone in class one time, I don't remember his numbers, but he said that when they put experience level agreements in place, they had eliminated at least double-digit numbers of SLAs because they just had so many. And I think we've got to be really careful. We've become so numbers-oriented that we just keep tweaking numbers instead of improving the service or the experience, right? And I think it's a tough transition for IT as well to start to really appreciate that sentiment matters and that it's an indicator. So the surveys, the XLAs, the measuring of it, and it's just truly a continual improvement effort. And it's not a switch, just like SLAs. It's not a switch that you can just flip and now suddenly we have all these experience level agreements. I think you get started somewhere and then you figure out where to go next.
Yeah.
What's our next XLA? And just keep growing from there. And again, have it's company wide, so have representation from across the company.
Yeah, that's key. Figure out where you're going to head, start up the project, get the funding, start taking action cross-functionally.
Yes.
So where can people connect and learn more?
Oh, there are a lot of places that you can learn. XLA.tv does have videos, lots of information out there. XLA Collab has a ton of information and training. And also, if you're going to Support World Live this year in Las Vegas, the Essence of Experience and the XLA Foundations class are happening as pre-cons. So we would love to see you there.
Thank you so much for being here, Rae Ann.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
And to the audience, thanks for hitting play. I'll see you around the way. I'm your host, Matt Barron. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn as Matt Barron. Subscribe to Ticket Volume on your favorite platforms. Thanks for listening to Ticket Volume, a podcast powered by InvGate. Brings simplicity to your IT operations.